Hey, how's it going? And welcome to another JoJo June video. Alright, so I don't know about y'all, but at least to me, it still feels very, very weird, the idea that we live in a post-JoJolion world. Like, even though I wasn't a super active JoJolion reader, it was one of those things that was kind of always present, because when I got into JoJo's Bizarre Adventure back in 2012, JoJolion was like the new thing, right? At the time, it had only been running for a year, so it was still very fresh. So there's never been a moment in my life until like the past year when I was like into JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but JoJolion was not running. Just think how different the world is now compared to when JoJolion started, right? Like, if you go back in time and you tell somebody in 2011 about just the absolute insanity that has been the entirety of the 2020s so far, nobody would believe you. But one thing that was very, very interesting about JoJolion was the speculation surrounding it. And I think it was kind of just a perfect sort of storm of circumstances that led to this. Like, obviously, JoJolion for us was like, this is our first new part pretty much ever, unless you were part of the like real old guard kind of people that were like reading Steel Ball Run when it was coming out. But other than that, like before Steel Ball Run, you had to be in a pretty fucking hardcore circle to like be into JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, right? So it was our first time getting to see like a new JoJo part, and I think it also benefited from being definitely the JoJo part that had the most like mysteries and kind of like build up in terms of its like narrative. I would say JoJolion is definitely the most intricate part, right? And I think it was also the JoJo part that probably stood to benefit the most from like the power of the internet and people just being able to discuss stuff so rapidly, right? And I think definitely the single biggest kind of topic of contention when it came to JoJolion before this particular character was even introduced was the main antagonist of JoJolion. Whether that was, who's it gonna be? Is it a character we've already met? Like, what's their stand gonna be like? And there was an entire sort of subsect of people who weren't even willing to read JoJolion until the main bad guy was like at least introduced. And I think when you kind of take a step back and think about that, like, in the grand scheme of things, that sounds kind of like weird, right? Like, imagine if you were trying to recommend some new manga to your friend that you were really enjoying and they asked you, okay, but who's the main bad guy? And you were like, fucking, I don't know, there's only like 20 chapters so far. And then they were like, I'm not gonna read it until I know who the main bad guy is. Like, that sounds like a dumb conversation, right? But I think that more so speaks to just like the kind of power and just how legendary a lot of Araki's main antagonists are, that people were willing to like not even read the shit until this character was introduced. But yeah, the main antagonist of JoJolion is of course Toru. So where do you even start with a character like this? Because I feel like there's a lot to talk about. I guess I'll start by talking about his design. So Toru manages to have, I think, one of the most like hilarious and weird outfits of the entire series. First of all, I really dig his hair, this like afro sort of thing with the little swirlies in it. His actual outfit is hilarious. He has these genuinely just awful pants that have these bright piss yellow kind of color, or at least that's the color they go with in the like JoJo colored scans. But yeah, and then on top he's got these like teddy bears on his shoulders. Just really weird design, but I think he definitely, mostly the hair, he manages to stand out among like the rest of Araki's characters. So I think that's good. Like, just from the man's silhouette alone, you could probably tell like, oh yeah, that's Toru. So when it comes to Toru's role in the story, I kind of feel like I once again have to take a step back, since we find out pretty early on that there's this whole Lokakaka like smuggling ring going on. Like, the first sort of half of the bad guys are Damo's like smuggling gang, and then the second half are like the medical researcher guys. And similar to Diavolo, he's pretty incognito. Like, he's definitely not like Dio, whereas Dio is very much like, yeah, I'm the big shit, I'm Dio. Toru is a lot more low-key and like, you know, he doesn't really show up until, what chapter does he first like really appear in? Chapter 81. So we spend a pretty solid majority of the story not really knowing who this guy is. And I think ultimately, like, probably my biggest problem with Toru is just the fact that I feel like I'm just not very attached to him, like, as a character. And I'm not really sure exactly why that is, because, like, if you look at the amount of time he spends in the manga, he first shows up in chapter 81, and then he makes his last appearance in chapter 110, which is the final chapter. So he spends, like, just about, like, what, a fourth of the manga being active and, like, a present character? And I can't really say, oh, he has no build-up. He just comes out of nowhere, because like I said, we spent pretty much the entirety of JoJolion going up this, like, pyramid where it's like at the bottom we have the low-level, like, rock human smuggler guys. And then we learned that, like, the real head honchos are the medical people, and Toru is their boss, so that also isn't the problem, but there's actually a lot of stuff about Toru that I like a lot. So I would say probably my favorite thing about him is just, like, his philosophies and some of his views on the world, and, like, what he's trying to do with the Lokakaka, and this is something that I only kind of came to realize pretty recently, but I think one of the strongest aspects of basically all of Araki's antagonists are their philosophies, right? Because even if you think that what they believe in is batshit insane or just downright evil, you gotta admit, at the end of the day, it's at least interesting, right? Like, Dio in part 1, for example, is just so fucking evil and so fun, like, even if his actual philosophy isn't quite as fleshed out as it is later, it's nonetheless enjoyable to see somebody who's just such a piece of shit, right? And then you have Cars and his kind of, like, obsession with overcoming his species' innate weakness, and his frustration with, like, every other Pillar Man's kind of acceptance of this weakness, to the point where he was willing to literally slaughter his whole species except for 3 other people. Or Diavolo and his, like, kind of obsession with fate and the idea that life kind of throws these challenges at you for you to overcome. Or Funny Valentine and these, like, ultra-nationalistic ideas where he's gonna use the corpse and, like, say fuck literally the entire rest of the planet. America is going to be #1. And Toru's philosophy especially is something that I find is becoming more and more kind of, like, relatable as I get older. But JoJolion is ultimately a story about, like, Josuke trying to find out who he is and reclaim some of his memories. And likewise, Toru is a character who really espouses, like, the value of memories and this kind of, like, almost superiority that comes with experience and, like, this sort of, like, mental immortality of dreams and memories, because, you know, Toru is an old fucking dude, right? Like, he was yucking about in the fucking 1940s, so he's been around for a while. Like, he's probably borne witness to, like, the fucking JoJolion equivalent of World War II. And that's another pretty recurring theme you see with the JoJo main antagonist is, like, essentially justification for, like, their sense of superiority. Like, to bring up Funny Valentine again, he kind of gets this feeling of superiority from this idea that he's going to take the first napkin, like, he is going to be the one who changes the world, and because of that, he's, like, in some way better than other people. Or Pucci and his idea that he's essentially on this divine mission, and he's going to lead people to heaven, and that's what makes him better than other people. So that's something we see repeated in JoJo pretty often, so I think Toru kind of, like, basing his superiority off of his age and just, like, the value of memories and experiences and kind of just this idea that, like, you know, at the very end of the day, you can lose everything, but you're still going to have your memories. And beyond just his kind of overarching philosophy, I think Toru has a lot of, like, fun kind of quirks to him. Like, you know, every now and again, you'll see him kind of listening to his music or rocking out, like, singing to it. And his relationship with Yasuho is so fucking strange, right? I don't know why Josuke bothered using Soft and Wet Go Beyond. He could have just made a Google Doc, right? But I don't know, I think it's kind of interesting. Like, it reminds me of the relationship somebody would have who, like, doesn't really understand romance at all. It's almost like this weird kind of puppy love crush, right? Or it's like somebody who, like, doesn't really understand romance in general, or kind of, like, social cues when it comes to, like, what's appropriate. Because, like, remember when Yasuho, like, first runs into him when he's first introduced, and he's like, yeah babe, you used to get really wet from my fingers back in the day. Like, dude, shut the fuck up. So I think that's kind of an interesting little aspect of his character, is, like, his sort of strange approach to relationships and, like, people in general. Because Toru kind of seems like the kind of person who, like, Toru, like, I don't really get the vibe from Toru that he's, like, openly malicious or just hates people. Obviously, his whole scheme is like, yeah, rock humans #1. So we're gonna get the Lokakaka and, like, sell immortality, essentially. And that's how we're gonna climb up the ranks. But, you know, he's kind of like a sociopath, right? Like, he doesn't really get any pleasure from hurting other people. He probably just doesn't really get relationships. Like, it doesn't seem like he particularly gives a shit about the other rock humans, because remember when fucking poor Tom was, like, trying to get in the ambulance? And instead of helping out his comrade, he just did the Wonder Review and fucking killed him? So maybe his relationship with Yasuho is him almost, like, trying to be normal, so to speak? Since that's definitely a very, very large kind of chip on his shoulders, is, like, what he's not allowed to do. Since he basically has to use his stand as, like, his substitute for, like, making progress in his fucking medical profession. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff I like about Toru. I kind of like his position as being, like, the secret undercover leader of the Rokakaka organization. I'm realizing now I flip-flop between calling it Lokakaka and Rokakaka, but whatever, people in Japan probably do the same fucking thing, I don't know. But yeah, his like weird fucked up relationship with Yasuho is pretty interesting. And I think his philosophies when it comes to memories and dreams is super interesting. And so I think that kind of loops back around into my original question, which is like, why am I just not all that attached to this character? Since, you know, again, it's not an issue of, oh, he just doesn't have enough screen time, or, oh, he's just not built up enough. But I do still kind of feel like it probably would have helped overall if he was introduced just like a little bit earlier. Or even if he was present from really early on, like, imagine how much fun it would have been if, like, in chapter 15 or something, we just, like, offhandedly meet Yasuho's boyfriend, or ex-boyfriend, rather. He's kind of just this, like, weird, sort of creepy dude who's always listening to music and, like, making strange passes at Yasuho despite the fact that their relationship ended a while ago. Like, that would have been the most fun shit in the world. Just imagine it's the year 2013. Things are not totally, utterly fucked yet. And you see online people are speculating, like, mostly jokingly, but there's a couple of serious people who are like, you know what? Toru is the main antagonist. This guy is a rock human. He's the main antagonist, mark my words. And everybody else is like, yeah, whatever. Would have been one of those, like, fun, goofy, just dumb theories that ended up being fucking totally true. Like, I think that would have been super fun, but yeah, it is what it is. And thinking about that kind of has me wondering, just like, how much Araki even intended for this guy to be the main antagonist, right? Since the first time he shows up is in chapter 81. That's when he gives the good old speech about how Yasuho used to get pretty wet on his fingers. That's so gross. So I kind of wonder, like, when he drew Toru for the first time, if that was the plan all along, if it was like, if he included him with the intention of him being the main bad guy, or if, like, that's kind of just something he sort of came around to, is like, yeah, I kind of like the look of this Toru guy, you know what, you're my main bad guy now. And of course, we have his stand, the Wonder of You. So the Wonder of You visually, I think, is so cool looking, right? Stands that wear real clothing are pretty uncommon, so it's really neat to see this stand all dressed up in, like, his top hat and his scarf, and, like, he's got his little walking stick. And I also think that his, like, ability is so perfect and so kind of fitting of, like, the main bad guy of JoJolion, because since, like, when he was first introduced, I wasn't, like, actively reading JoJolion at the time, but I remember hearing the chatter about, man, the Wonder of You is so fucking busted. What a bullshit stand, right? So that's when I knew, like, oh yeah, Rocky, he did it again, right? Calamity is just such a cool concept for, like, an ability. Just the idea of shit goes bad, right? Like, you even think about trying to pursue this guy and a fucking stop sign is gonna fly at you. I don't think I like it quite as much as D4C and its, like, dimension hopping abilities, but I think that idea of Calamity really ties back into, like, the philosophy thing I was talking about, where all of Araki's villains have really interesting philosophies. And I think this is like an ability with a really interesting philosophy. Like, Araki talked about this a little bit in, like, if you saw my Araki quotes video, he mentions in one of the little JoJolion, like, volume quotes, he thinks the most dangerous enemy one can face is Calamity. It's like, when you stop and think about it, yeah, like, what's the most dangerous shit in the world? Well, things not going right. And I think just this idea of, like, trying to pursue or even, like, thinking about attacking somebody leading to you getting fucked up is such a fun idea. To the point where Josuke was like, alright, I can't pursue this guy, I can't think about going after him, so I'm just gonna sit here. Like, that's a legitimate strategy, but I think once again, like, Araki kind of fell into this trapping of making his, like, final antagonist powers too strong. And at least to me, I think this is, like, probably Araki's biggest, like, reoccurring writing problem, is that he makes his villains so powerful that it, like, necessitates a power-up in order to defeat them. And I think that stuff especially sticks out because JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is really, it's not a series about power-ups. Like Dragon Ball and Naruto and Bleach, those are about power-ups, right? Like characters getting new forms and training and stuff like that. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, like 9 times out of 10, is about the usage of your abilities and like how those abilities interact with your opponent. And most of the time it's more so a mental battle rather than just like, aha, you fool, I have Ultra Mega Super Sage Mode Bankai now. And even though I'm complaining about it, like, ironically, at the same time, I do think it's also a problem that, like, in some cases is kind of overblown. Like, I don't really view the ending of part 5 as, like, having this problem, because since throughout the entirety of parts, like, 5 and 4, it's very well established that if you get the arrow, then that's a good thing. Part 3 is definitely a pretty classic, like, debate when it comes to, like, Star Platinum having the time stop. The whole, oh, they're the same kind of stand thing, but... And so, likewise, I think that the ability of Go Beyond and kind of, like, how Toru's defeated is another thing you can definitely, like, debate about. You know, this is definitely one that I stop and think, like, okay, sure, because... You know, throughout part 7, the spin is established as being, like, the spin is fucking broken, dude. Like, fucking infinitely spinning, piercing through dimensional barriers, like... So I can accept the idea that the spin is like, yeah, the spin will fuck this guy up, but, I don't know, it's convenient, right? Like, I think that's ultimately kind of what the debate boils down to, is, like, how much convenience in the story are you willing to put up with? So yeah, I don't know, I don't mind it, it's just like, Araki makes his antagonist way too fucking powerful. But I don't know, to some extent that's definitely like a good thing, right? Because you don't want these guys to suck. That's definitely part of like, the appeal of a lot of these characters is that they're so busted. Like, look at fucking Ultimate Cars. What a dumb character, right? Like, bro, look at fucking Funny Valentine. But since the other antagonists are kind of on my mind, like, Toru, I think he definitely had very high expectations placed on him. Like, at least to me, I don't think it would have been possible for Araki to top Funny Valentine. Like, Funny Valentine is my favorite antagonist ever, ever, ever. And then, like, Kira Yoshikage is in the top 5 or 10-ish, so... Yeah, he definitely had big shoes to fill, but even though I do like the guy, I still gotta say, I think he probably still falls in the kind of, like, lower echelon of JoJo antagonists for me. And I think I finally kind of found a way to put into words, like, what I'm feeling about this character, but I have a lot of stuff that I like about him, but I don't have very much that I love about him. You know, I like the plan, I like his design, I like his philosophies, I really like the wonder of you. It's a lot of likes and not a lot of loves, whereas I can take Funny Valentine and be like, you know what, I love this man, I love his stand, I love his philosophy, I love the plan. Or Kira, I can be like, yeah, I love his design, I love his weird fucking compulsions, I love Killer Queen, I love Bites of the Dust. So yeah, Toru, I like him. I think he works well as being JoJolion's, like, final antagonist. The Wonder of You is a really cool stand. And I think he's also, like, at least to me, this is probably the most interesting thing about him, and it has nothing to do with, like, the character himself. Which is just, like, before he was even introduced, the impact he had on JoJolion discussion and whether or not people were even going to read the manga, right? You know, I think that stuff is, like, deserves to be preserved just as much as the actual content. Just these, like, discussions around things and people's thoughts on the part as it was coming out. That's part of why I'm really excited for JoJo Lands, because, you know, I'm going to make a more conscious effort to read this one month to month, so yeah, it's gonna be fun to look back when it's finished in the year 2080 and see what we were thinking about it, right? But yeah, I think that's definitely something that's worth kind of documenting. It's just like old tweets and like videos, chapter reviews, forum posts, stuff like that. Since now that like experience is basically impossible to have since JoJolion is over, right? You know, there is no more speculating about, oh man, who's gonna be the main bad guy? Is it gonna be Jobin? There is no more of that debate about, oh, should I read it month to month or should I just wait for it to be done? Like, all that is over with. They're memories now. As Toru once said, when everything's over, all that will remain are dreams and memories. But yeah, that has been the video. Thank you all so much for watching, and especially a big thank you to my channel members. Man, the like life cycle of rock humans is so fucking weird. Like, Araki writes a lot of pretty weird shit. You know, it is called JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but he must have been fucking sleep deprived or something when he came up with like how the rock humans kind of like form. You know, first they're born and then their mom abandons them and then they wait for a wasp to come get them, and then they grab onto the wasp, turn into stone, go into the hive, and then they just hang out in this hornet's nest for 17 years, and then they explode into a full-sized adult and they come out. Y'all ever wonder if like the people in your lives might be rock humans? But yeah, I'll see you guys next time.